Welcome back to Combat Ufology with Argo. Tonight we cover the fourth pillar, Bud Hopkins, ufologist and alien abductee researcher. Elliot Bud Hopkins was born June 15, 1931, and he passed away August 21, 2011. He was an American artist, author, and ufologist. He was a prominent figure in alien abduction phenomenon and related UFO research. Elliot Bud Hopkins was born in 1931. He was raised in Wheeling, West Virginia. He lived with his parents, Elliot B. Hopkins and Eleanor A. Hopkins, brother Stuart and sister Eleanor. At age 2, Hopkins contracted polio. During the long recovery process, Hopkins developed an interest in drawing and watercolors, which eventually led him to Oberlin College, Oberlin, Ohio, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in art history in 1953. It was here Hopkins was exposed to art with a capital A and attended a lecture by Robert Motherwell that first introduced him to the automatic gestural approach that Motherwell espoused. From Oberlin, Hopkins moved to New York City, where he met Franz Klein, Mark Rothko, Robert Motherwell, William de Kooning, and other abstract expressionists. For a time, Hopkins studied art history at Columbia University and worked a low-level job selling tickets at the Museum of Modern Art. His experimentation with college techniques and styles as an abstract expressionist won him national acclaim. Hopkins' first solo show was held in New York City in 1956, the same year he met and married his wife of 13 years, Joanne Rich. After the publication of his book Missing Time in 1981, Hopkins became known as much for his UFO and abduction research as for his art. As a self-described humanist, Hopkins saw his work with alleged alien abduction victims as a way to bring attention to an otherwise marginalized part of society. His follow-up book Intruders, The Incredible Visitations at Copley Woods, published in 1987, helped establish Hopkins as a prominent leader in the UFO movement. As a child, Hopkins experienced firsthand Orson Welles' 1938 radio play, The War of the Worlds. This both terrified Hopkins and his family and left psychic scars. He considered the radio play a dramatic theatrical hoax, and because of his childhood scare, felt it added to his skepticism about alien invasions rather than enamor him to the idea of it. His interest in UFOs and alien visitation was renewed when, in August 1964, Hopkins and two others reported experiencing a daytime sighting of an unidentified flying object, or UFO, in the form of a darkish elliptical object off Cape Cod in Truro, Massachusetts. Dissatisfied with the response Hopkins received when he reported the incident to nearby Otis Air National Guard Base, he suspected a possible government cover-up. Hopkins began reading about UFOs and collecting stories of people who claimed to have experienced contact with alien beings. He also joined the now-defunct UFO research group, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, otherwise known as NICAP. In 1975, Hopkins was approached by George O. Barsky, who purportedly witnessed alien figures step out of a spacecraft and take soil samples at North Hudson Park in northern Bergen, New Jersey. Hopkins, Ted Blocher, and then director of New York State's Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, and Jerry Storer, also of MUFON, investigated the incident, interviewing the witness and taking soil samples. After Hopkins' account of the O. Barsky case appeared in the Village Voice in 1976, he began receiving regular letters from other UFO witnesses, including a few cases of missing time, seemingly inexplicable gaps in abductee memories. Hopkins, using data from his investigations with Blocher and psychologist Aphrodite Clammer, expanded this idea in his book Missing Time. Behavioral patterns extrapolated from abductee letters led Hopkins to identify core emotional responses based on their experiences, fear, awe, or wonderment at alien technological abilities. Affection toward their captors, which he likened to the Patty Hearst syndrome, anger, and helplessness. He believed aliens were either incapable of understanding the psychological effects of their encounters with humans, or that they were a callous, indifferent, immoral, race bent solely upon gratifying its own scientific needs at whatever cost to us. Hopkins is often credited with popularizing the idea of alien abductions as genetic experimentation. Through the publication of his book Intruders, he has been dubbed Father of the Abduction Movement by some. Hopkins, along with Elizabeth Slater, who conducted psychological tests of abductees, likened these experiences to rape, specifically for the purpose of human reproductive capabilities. In fact, Hopkins was inclined to dismiss his clients' conscious memories of abuse for more alien explanations. He was an alarmist rather than a spiritualist in his approach to the alien visitations, believing the visitations to be apocalyptic and that no good could come from these encounters. He described his victims' experiences as severe and nightmarish. While both men and women reported to Hopkins abductions by aliens that included sexual encounters, allegedly for some form of extraterrestrial eugenics, women in particular seem to be a part of a highly technological colonization scheme. These victims were reportedly taken to spaceships, impregnated by extraterrestrials, then later, as the hybrid baby developed, returned to the ship to have the fetus removed and given up to the alien parent. The alien parents purportedly had the ability to communicate telepathically with their child. On occasion, according to victims' reports as told by Hopkins, the human parents were allowed to see their human-alien hybrid or transgenic children. Once a victim, according to Hopkins, abductees were powerless over the intrusions and susceptible to additional kidnappings, which may extend to their human children. If people have had one abduction experience, Hopkins said, then they will have others. Hopkins partnered with David M. Jacobs, history professor at Temple University, Philadelphia, PA, and John Mack, psychiatry professor at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to design a Roper poll to find out how many of the nearly 6,000 respondents surveyed had experienced what the three believed to be symptoms indicative of alien abductions. The poll was released in 1991. If generalized to the public at large, the survey results indicated that several million Americans are regularly affected by alien abductions. Hopkins met and encouraged self-proclaimed abductees to discuss their experiences by holding free monthly group therapy sessions. Groups such as this were reported at the time as the most recent development in UFO mania. Attendees represented people from all walks of life: attorneys, policemen, teachers, airline pilots, psychologists, psychiatrists, and the like. Drawing as many as 20 people each month, these support meetings were, according to Hopkins, like other New York social events, complete with dinner and a lot of social chatter. Hopkins, trained as an artist, not as a psychotherapist or social worker, described the people who attended these groups as veterans of trauma. They were, in his view, victims who experienced often intrusive and painful physical examinations by their alien abductors and whose stories were best told through hypnosis. Abduction memories, according to Hopkins, rarely emerge unaided and may at first present to the abductees as vague anxieties, specific phobias, bad dreams, fragmentary and disturbing memories, or what seemed like an explicable episode of missing time. Many of his attendees contacted Hopkins after reading his books or newspaper advertisements that included his books as reference material. Seeing him on television programs such as Will Schreiner, Sally Jesse Raphael, The Marsha Warfield Show, Charles Grodin, and others, some critics interpreted these television appearances a way for Hopkins and other UFO authors such as Whitley Strieber to recruit possible abductees. Still, other support group members attended the many UFO conferences held in the United States and internationally at which Hopkins was a speaker. Although Hopkins had no formal psychological training, he watched other professionals over an 8-year period and developed his own techniques. In his opinion, these professionals, notably Robert Naiman, Aphrodite Klarman, and Gerard Franklin, were quite skeptical of the reality of abduction claims, yet all uncovered detailed abduction scenarios from their patients. In his opinion, these professionals, notably Robert Naiman, Aphrodite Klarman, and Gerard Franklin, were quite skeptical of the reality of abduction claims, yet all uncovered detailed abduction scenarios from their patients. According to Hopkins, any feeling of uneasiness about a place or any sense of lost time that is often accounted for by daydreaming, could be attributed to alien abduction. He believed aliens were capable of blocking or submerging memories in the people they were abducting. By 1995, Hopkins had worked with hundreds of abductees. It was during these hypnosis sessions that Hopkins' belief in UFO abduction deepened. To him, the purported similarities among client stories lent credibility to the abductees' stories. Physical proof of alien abduction for Hopkins came in the form of scoop marks or indentation of the skin, scars or cuts on the mouth, nose, ears, or genitalia, or unexplained bruises that might clear up in a day, and abductee claims of implants interpreted as a control or monitoring device similar to those used by human scientists to track and tag animals in the wild. He also believes the alien spacecraft left marks on the ground where they landed and that the aliens could be photographed. Anecdotal proof of alien sightings or abductions, which Hopkins considered tightly imagined testimonies by abductees, included victim stories of observing unconventional objects in the sky, witnessing unusual activities such as an alien digging for soil samples, flying through the air, or being transported to a ship, a sense of being watched, or the presence of hooded beings near the bed at night, a sense of paralysis or immobilization while lying in bed or in their cars, impressions of flying or passing through closed windows or walls, a feeling of having been outside upon awakening. Here are the books that Bud Hopkins wrote. Art, Life, and UFOs, a Memoir, 2009. Sight Unseen, Science, UFO Invisibility, and Transgenic Beings, 2003, with Carol Rainey. Witnessed, The True Story of the Brooklyn Bridge, UFO Abduction, 1996. Intruders, The Incredible Visitations at Copley Woods, 1987. Sacred Spaces, The Book of Temples, The Book of Guardians, The Book of Altars, 1983. Missing Time, a documented study of UFO abductions, 1981. All right, Argo, tell us why Bud Hopkins constitutes the fourth pillar.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Combat Ufology with Argo. So today we're after what may be the most important pillar in the entire program, Bud Hopkins. So as Lee described in the bio, Bud Hopkins is so important to ufology and to the future of abductee ufology. Not just because of the groundwork that he laid in his own work, but the tools that he has passed on in his work that you can read about in all of his work, how he came about his conclusions in his books. I can remember reading Missing Time, and at the time, in the early 80s, abductees were kind of talked about, and one of the biggest mysteries is that people were having these events where they would walk in their house from work, they would get a glass of water, turn and look outside, see a strange light, and go, that's strange. And as they turned back to pour their glass of water out, 2 hours had went by. And there were numerous cases of these missing time events that were purported by different people, including people like Whitley Strieber. And that book lays it out in no uncertain terms that people were disappearing from their environment physically, and they were on board alien spaceships, and they were undergoing many times painful procedures. I can remember one of the most horrifying ones I ever heard, and what was more terrible is that you learn later that this is actually kind of a commonplace thing for all abductees, and that is that an eye will be removed. And it isn't like it's removed and snipped out. It's removed and laid down the side of your head while they work on the interior of your skull to put an implant in. And many times abductees will remember this. It's horrifying. During regression, because regression is the literal reliving of the event, people will relive the pain of these things. Horrifying. Bud Hopkins is the first person I remember. I've seen a story where Dave Jacobs tells it himself, for the first time he got a call from Bud Hopkins saying that they had shown a woman a child that had been taken from her as a zygote. This is all the way back in the early 80s, because Bud and Dave were research partners and they shared information between each other. As you heard Lee state, the Roper poll of 91 was contracted by Dave Jacobs and Bud Hopkins and John Mack. John Mack is a Harvard guy, you know, he's an elite, intelligent guy, Nobel Prize winner. So Bud was probably the first researcher to understand that women were being brought back to hold these children because there was something missing from these children that could only be got from human touch. This is a story that we learned some of in Debbie Cobble's story from the Strange Intruders in Copley Woods. It's also where Lee mentioned that you can find their trace evidence, because Debbie had the evidence in her backyard burnt in indelibly, and it stayed for years. So Bud, in his later life, understood that the community is having a problem with invisibility. How could a ship be invisible? How could a being be invisible? How could all of this at once be invisible? So the book Sight Unseen, as his dying work, was to try and give the world some of his experience with UFO and alien invisibility. In the book Sight Unseen, get it. But what I'm going to tell you about is the book, The Brooklyn Bridge Abduction Incident. This abduction was witnessed by thousands of people. Linda Corteil was floated out a window, accompanied by aliens, into a ship, and it was seen by hundreds of people on the bridge. People not in cars, people in cars. But what's really incredible about Linda's case is that I can remember when I first read this, it's the first understanding that I ever could really make that the alien society has some kind of understanding the way our power structure works. Because at the time that she's being abducted, down below on the street is Perez de Cuellar, worked for the UN for America, and his 2 security agents and his limo driver. And they were all abducted, along with Linda being seen by everybody on the Brooklyn Bridge. And they went, I think it was somewhere down underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, down onto a beach. And the aliens basically had her scold Perez de Cuellar and these 2 other men, and they had them kneeling down in this filthy sand. And Linda was scolding them and telling them how they needed to do everything that they could to try and help the planet, that we were killing our planet. So I'm not going to tell it all to you, but it was so powerful for Perez de Cuellar that he sent Linda's son a diving helmet, a very old, very expensive diving helmet, because the 2 of them had an exchange during an event. So, what do we learn from Bud? We learned so much. We learned that the aliens are taking zygotes out of women, that women make up the bulk, 60% of all abductees, that women are forced to carry this child, whether they know it or not, and then it's taken from them and then transformed into a little transgenic being, partly us and partly them. A perfect little monster with high intelligence. Usually the children are cold because they don't live in a society with emotion. They live in a society where there can be no emotion. Things have to be perfect and exact every time, in every way for them. Unflawed, like our society is. We learned from Bud that they literally take you through a wall. Literally take you through a wall or a window or a door or the ceiling. We don't know how they do this. We don't know how they do this. I know I've heard some of the great researchers talk about how they will teach kids very young. They'll give them a toy, and you can make the toy light up in colors, or you can make the toy levitate, but you do it all with your mind. So they'll bring in a hybrid child, and they'll sit that child down with your 8-year-old child in front of the toy, and an in-charge gray will say to your child, light the thing up, or make it rise. And your child will say, I can't do that. And the in-charge gray and the little gray halfling being will say, yes, you can, watch. And the little gray being will make it rise with its mind. And before long, your child has endured enough of these events where, guess what? Your child learns how to turn the light on or levitate the device. This story is known in abduction ufology. I wonder why it's not spoke of anywhere else. I guess that would be because it's the truth, and the truth is not supposed to be out there. So if you're listening here, you're learning the truth. I'm telling you where to go look at the truth yourself so that you can come to the exact same conclusion, because this is important. This is all going somewhere, folks. All week long, I've been taking a shelling from Greer's face all over the internet. Greer wants you to hug an alien. The aliens don't want to hug you. Number one order given by an alien to a human: come with me. Number two order: lay down. Lots of things we can learn from Bud Hopkins. We learned that they are extremely interested in creating a being, and that their genetics are incredible. Debbie Cobble went on to write her own book after Bud Hopkins' book about her. But there again, if you've been listening to the show, you know that there is no way to learn the truth without the tool of regression, refined by Bud Hopkins. One of the things we learn is that Bud, being hyper intelligent, used clinicians to learn how to use this tool himself, because clinicians are taught things that you can't use when you're peeling back the layers of a memory with an abductee. You can't do it. It's leading questions. His process was refined and perfected to where you could really find the truth. And he taught it not only to Dave Jacobs, another research fellow, but also enlightened John Mack about it, and others. Bud was unique. Bud is sorely missed. And I want you to know again that Bud's dying wish was that all of you understand that the aliens can be invisible, and they can be in an invisible craft. They can be an invisible being in your house, outside standing by your car, standing in the woods. following you to the store, going to the mall with you. Anywhere they want to follow you, they can, because they do. But we'll learn more about all that in some of the coming pillars, because let me tell you, the messages that are going to be coming out now are not nice. They're just the truth. And I don't find the truth to be very nice. Like Lee said, Bud found that they're one of two things, and one of those was that we are literally a victim to their will, and they care nothing about us. And that's what you would have to take from all of Bud's work, is that is definitely the fact. So, fifth pillar's coming. That's Dr. Carla Turner. She was a good friend of Bud Hopkins and Dave Jacobs and John Mack. And you stick around and you're going to learn more of the truth. And as you learn more of the truth, you're going to learn more about who's lying to you just by learning about the truth. Our fob is almost built. We almost have our foundations built. Foundations of truth, where we can look back at any fool and say, reference our previous material where you didn't look before and didn't know. Because once the 7 pillars are out, I'm going to attack these fools, these people who lead millions and know nothing. I'll use their own video representations to show you how foolish they are, because they just spout trash. Stick around for the next pillar. Stick around for all the pillars, because after they're done, we're going to be calling some powerful effects on people's heads. And I got news. I'm a master blaster. See you next time.